My name is Matt Queen, and I serve as the L.R. Scarborough Chair of Evangelism and Professor of Evangelism at Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas. I also direct the Revive the Nation program, and I just want to thank you for being a part of history. Throughout the storied history of our seminary, all the way back to Dr. Roy Fish, we have done a program. It's been called many things. It's been known as Pioneer Penetration. It's been known as Spring Revival Practicum, and now it's known as Revive the Nation. And you and your church are going to be a part of a process together with Southwestern Seminary to see what God will be up to this year. You know, I've heard it, and you've probably heard it. Maybe you've even said it. Revivals don't work anymore. Well, on one way I agree with that, and one way I disagree with that. In one way I agree with it. You know, revivals don't work anymore because we don't work them. Even if you have a meeting, you know, many times people will just have a revival meeting and, you know, it's just more like a Bible conference than it is anything else because the church has maybe not been prepared to be able to prepare for the revival, to get people there, not just church members, but also the community there so that they can hear the gospel. So on this video, I want to give you just a few things to think about with your church. You're the pastor of your church. You know your church better than somebody in Fort Worth, Texas. But I want to talk to you about some things that are working in churches across the nation to help them as they prepare for revivals. And to the extent that those things help you, we want to be available to you. I want you to know that in the process of the preparation for the revival, if you've got any questions, please email me at mqueen@swbts.edu. Again, that's mqueen@swbts.edu. And I will be happy to help you put some of these pieces together as you help your church prepare. The most important thing that any church can do in preparing for revival is pray. You know, a lot of times we get our results because we've done things in our own power. But for us to see God results, we've got to do things in the Spirit's power. And we'll never be able to do that if we first aren't led in prayer. And so, Pastor, I would just like to encourage you in the ways that fit for your congregation and your circumstance. I want to encourage you to lead your people to pray. Begin now. Let them know of the date that's coming for the revival and have them pray. Encourage if you have small groups or growth groups or Sunday school or home Bible studies or whatever, encourage them to pray. And not just to pray, just don't tell them to pray. Give them specific things to pray for. Pretty soon you're going to hear who your preacher is, who we are sending to you. Be praying for that young man. Be praying for him if he has a family and his family is, he'll be leaving them to come to see you. Be praying for the community. Give specifics and don't give all the specifics at once, but kind of pare them out over time so that classes can be praying for the revival. Also, in a corporate time of setting of morning worship, or if you have something like a Wednesday night Bible study or something like that, begin praying for the revival. But let me just encourage you, studies have been done, and the studies that show churches that are effective in evangelism in terms of growing by evangelism, all the time, those churches are those that pray for the lost by name. Now, not in a way that embarrasses that person, or if they're in the audience calling them out and say, hey, look at Joe over there, you know, we really need to pray for his salvation. We need to do it in a tactful way. But by praying for people's salvation, by maybe even putting it on a card and maybe putting it in a bin or something like that where people can be maybe pray for it later on as those names are taken out. But think of a way to begin to praying for lost people by name. And here's why you want to do that, Pastor. Number one, God's not going to work if God's people aren't praying. But second of all, God and the Holy Spirit have a way of working in your people's hearts when they're praying for lost people, because God gives them what's called a burden. The more you pray for someone who's lost, the more you have a burden to see that person saved. And so I just encourage you to do that through the Sunday school, in small groups, corporate worship, and also something that a lot of churches have been doing since the COVID-19 pandemic is having prayer meetings throughout the week on Zoom. My church does this in Joshua, Texas, where every Thursday we get together, and it's not our Sunday school class, it's just another group of people, and get together to pray for the needs of the church and to pray for revival. And so think about how, in your context, you could utilize this time to the time of the revival to pray. A second thing that I would like to suggest that you consider is to mobilize your congregation in evangelism. I want you to know that we at Southwestern have a resource called Mobilize to Evangelize. And your student preacher or your faculty member or staff member from Southwestern will be trained in how to use that resource. In fact, we will get a resource to you in some way, either through the student or through the school, to be able to help you assess where your church is in evangelism. So we want you to use that. And also, the seminary is providing another resource that you've just received. It's a training that's called Evangelizing Without Memorizing. You know, for our history as Southern Baptists, the way we've trained people to evangelize is they've equated evangelizing with memorizing. In other words, we think that the gospel comes in the form of a script. And the fact of the matter is, if people know enough of the gospel to be saved by it, well, then they know enough of the gospel to share it. And so this training is a short 30-minute training that you can do in Sunday school classes and small groups. You can do it on a Wednesday night or a Sunday night to help give your people the confidence that if they are saved, they can share. And then, Pastor, you can do all kinds of other little things. There's a lot of churches that are doing campaigns. And maybe, the things that we celebrate in our church are the things that our people replicate. And so maybe find a way to celebrate what the church is doing in evangelism before the revival. For example, maybe there's a board you want to do, or maybe you want to do a receptacle with ping pong balls or something, and you have a certain color for how many people are invited to the revival. And you're pumping that up every week. Hey folks, we had this many people more invited to the revival. Have your people reporting for it. Because as people are reporting and talking about it and seeing it, they're talking about revival. Revival's on their mind, and they've got some buy-in to the revival. Maybe tell them how many people shared the gospel that week and have some kind of reporting way through email, text message, or maybe through on your website, you've got some kind of church management system that you can do that with. How many people maybe get saved before the revival? And then how many people are baptized? Think of some ways, some tangible ways that you can bring attention in the corporate worship setting to help your people get on board in evangelism even before the revival begins. So that when we send a student preacher or a staff or a faculty member to you, it's not a foreign thing, it's not a new thing to try to get people to do evangelism while the revival's going on. If we can help you with that in any way, make sure to use the training, make sure to use the book that you're going to be sent, and also make sure you contact me. Pastor, I want to just encourage you to consider contacting some inactive members in your church. As we look at the Southern Baptist Convention, they say we're about 14 million strong. And I've heard other people say, well, yeah, if we could find them all. At your church and at my church, we have a lot more people on the membership roll than actually come to church that are actually active and involved. And so people have kind of slipped along the way. And sometimes that's on them, and really sometimes it's on the church because we've not done a good job to try to reclaim them in some way. Pastor, there's a lot of ways that you can contact them. You can send out an email blast. You can send a letter, something like that. You could also maybe get some of your church members and begin to think of some people that's not come in quite a while, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic. A lot of people just fell off. Use this revival. We at Southwestern would love to see this revival as a way for you to re-engage with those families and other families, to let them know. And when you go to them, don't just invite them to the revival like you're trying to get something from them. Actually, it might be a good thing for you to go and say, you know what? You've not been there in a while, and we've not been in contact with you, and in some way we've really not, served you well, and we're coming to apologize to you for that. But we want to re-engage, and we're getting ready to have a revival. We want you to come to that. Maybe you can come even before that. We want to re-engage with you and see how we can minister to you. And we hope that even the church will be stronger before the revival meeting even happens. So think about how to reach out, how to contact, how to minister to, and in some ways, how to reclaim church members that are inactive. Do you know many of the great revival movements in the history of the United States and really outside of the United States have happened because young people, God has gotten a hold of them. And a lot of time we talk about the church of tomorrow, the youth are our future. But the youth, students, they're our church now. They're part of our church now, and they should be. So find some ways that you can encourage participation. Maybe you have an event one night of the revival. Maybe you feed them one night, or whatever kinds of means might work for your context. But also look at some of the students that are in your church, and already serving in some way. Maybe use some of them if there's going to be an offering taken up, to maybe take up the offering, maybe to help greet, maybe to perform a song or something. But find a way to have students involved. And here's why. If you have students involved and they're doing something, especially performing in some way, it's likely that mom and dad will also want to come. And so try to do everything you can to capitalize on opportunities that will get not just students there, but their families there, so that they can hear the gospel and hopefully have a participating role in the results of your revival this year. Pretty soon you're going to hear from your student preacher. And we want to make sure that you're in contact with him and that he is in contact with you. And I hope, Pastor, a lot of these guys that we're going to be sending out, this might be their first revival. It might even be one of their first or second sermons. And we're hoping that you will be able to help invest in our students, just like professors like myself are investing in our students. I want you to know that as he reaches out to you, I'm going to do all I can on my end to make sure that he is as open with you and sharing with you prayer requests that he has. But he's going to want to know how he can pray for you. And so I'm hoping that you'll be able to schedule a phone call or maybe a Zoom meeting or something else like that with the student preacher to help encourage him as I'm trying to help encourage him, so that he can become the preacher of God that God has called him to be. I want you to know that your student is a student in Texas Baptist College. And we're so excited about him and what he's going to be able to do for you, Pastor. Part of the requirements of our college curriculum is that there has to be evangelism, which he is doing. He's doing that at your church. He's preaching. But also in the college, they want our students, and we want to make sure Texas Baptist College students are not able just to preach the gospel to someone that looks like them, but also those in a cross-cultural context. And so to the extent that you can try to help us to find and identify other places around your neighborhood, maybe it's a neighborhood or it's a borough or maybe it's a place in the city where there are other ethnic groups that meet together. Would you do us a favor and try to take our student to those places so that he can get some opportunities to be able to share the gospel in a cross-cultural context to someone that maybe speaks differently than him, but there's a shared interest there in English and a shared knowledge of English, or someone who looks different than him, because friends, the world is getting flat. The world is here. We are other places are here, and we're together, and we need to know how to communicate with each other to tell them the best news ever. So to the extent that you can identify some of those places and be an accompanying partner with our student, we'd appreciate that so very much. Last, I'd just like to encourage you that when your student preacher or your staff or faculty preacher hits the ground, please find some other opportunities other than just preaching at your church for him to be able to find. In fact, the greatest revival meeting I ever preached was back in 2017 in the upstate of South Carolina. Now, my pastor, of course, had the evenings and the Sundays that I was preaching, of course. But do you know that he scheduled me to be, and I was able to go to a public school. They had some kind of after-school thing where I was able to go to an after-school thing and talk to public school students, share the gospel, and we saw many students saved. So try to investigate where are some places that you could take our student preacher during the week, during the day, whether it is a public school, if there's even the opportunity for that, or maybe a private school or some homeschool consortium or just anywhere that there's a place, maybe a nursing home. Try to find some opportunities for our preacher to be able to share the gospel so that we can have the gospel exposed as much as possible in your neighborhood, and so that he can also get the more experience so that he can be the man of God that God's called him to be. We want to take this opportunity in the revival to also make sure that you know our deep appreciation for your church's sacrificial gifts to the Cooperative program. Do you know a lot of times people in churches give to the Cooperative program, but they never really see the results of it. And we want you to know that at Southwestern Seminary, when you have one of our students, we want your church to be reminded that this student is somebody that they are actually helping every week that they give to get the education and the training and the equipping they need in order to do the ministry that God has called them to be. Here at Southwestern, we're trying to help students live their calling. And because of your church's gifts and because of this opportunity that you're giving our student preacher, you're making that happen. Pastor, I've given you a lot of things to think about and to pray about. And of course, as I said at the beginning, you don't have to do any of the things that I have suggested to you. But I will tell you that God works when we work. And in order to have a revival that God's going to work in, many times that happens whenever a pastor and his church has been led to prepare the ground for the preacher who comes. And so again, if some of the things that I've shared, you'd have some questions about, or maybe you like to do it, but you don't know where to begin, let me just encourage you again to give me an email at mqueen@swbts.edu, and I'll be happy to help counsel, advise, help you in any way that you can to put these things in practice and anything else that the Lord may have on your mind.